Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatching experience.
Episode 16, DNA and Cold Cases. On today's episode, Jess and I discuss the murders of Julia Woodward, Jeannie Smith, and Linda Taylor by Charles Gary Sullivan, and then we'll discuss the murder of Susan Amy Morse by Thomas Cox, and how DNA helps solve these cold cases. So for today's episode, I'm going to start off with the question, when I say serial killer, what is the first thing you think of?
Cereal.
What kind of cereal, Jessica?
What kind is serial killer, or what is my favorite? My favorite is Honey Nut Cheerios, and I'll stand by that every day of the week.
Why Honey Nut Cheerios? Please explain.
I don't care that they're like
old
grandpa
people cereal.
Is my favorite. Hey, it's good for my cholesterol. No, it's because they're like Cheerios, but they're better because they're Honey Nut Cheerios. They're sweeter.
That's true. They are better than Cheerios, but I don't think they'd be my favorite cereal of all time. I think I'd go with Reese's Puffs or something.
Yeah. With your young kid cereal.
Yeah, with the hip, cool kid cereal. I think when we asked this, because we had to re-record this story because this was a beginning podcaster thing.
The audio was really bad. We're really doing listeners a favor by re-recording this.
But Kylee said something about Ted Bundy, and then I was like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that, because when I thought of serial killers, I was thinking like Jeffrey Dahmer, and then I was like, oh yeah, Ted Bundy and the original Night Stalker and all that other stuff, and then it all came to mind. But I also definitely 100% first thought was the 70s, because they were all running wild and crazy.
Yeah,
it was like
something in the
perfect time for serial killers,
I guess. And especially we recorded this a while back, and so I wasn't even familiar with any of the cases we've talked about since then, but I don't know, my answer stays the same.
Do you feel like you've learned a lot, for better or for worse?
Yeah, I mean, don't put me in any sort of like true crime trivia challenge, because my brain is a little bit like a sieve nowadays. But I'm definitely more familiar with things where like somebody will mention something, I'm like, oh yeah, my friend in this podcast, they told me all about that, instead of just being like, I don't know.
But you know a lot about H.H. Holmes.
I sure do.
If they had trivia for that, you could win.
If it was just H.H. Holmes trivia.
All right, so I picked today's story because it was solved more than 40 years after it occurred. And on top of it, the suspect in today's story was arrested in Arizona on August 28th of 2019 after being connected by DNA to the victim. The investigators in this case not only think he murdered Julia Woodward, but that the suspect murdered multiple people. So they think he's a serial killer. And they also think that there might be some undiscovered victims out there linked to him. On March 25th, 1979, Washoe County Sheriff's detectives discovered the shallow grave 15 miles north of Reno and Hungry Valley of 21-year-old Julia Woodward. A man on a dirt bike who was riding through the area found what he thought was a mannequin, and obviously discovered it wasn't a mannequin, because it never is.
That'd be creepy.
It would be really creepy. It would be creepy if one day, I think I saw a news story recently where it actually was a mannequin. And then Ryan tried to send me a message, and he was like, they found this weird body here, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, it was a mannequin. I already saw that. Thank you.
I got it already.
Don't try and tell me things.
You're like, listen, I'm up to date on all that. I get alerts. Don't worry about it.
I am the expert in this, not you. Thank you.
There was one time I dispatched deputies out to like a full-fledged like rave out in the forest, because that happens.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. And the deputies were trying to find their way. This is only sort of related, but it's funny. They were trying to find their way to like, they had to go, deep down these Forest Service roads, and they were following the like lights and music. They get to where like closer to where the party is, and there's this torso and head of a mannequin, so there's no arms or legs, and it's got like spray paint all over it and like glow sticks all over it. And they were commenting about it on the radio, and I got a picture sent to me, and and they were going like, oh, okay, well, you go like from the mannequin, take the Forest Service road to the left. And I remember at one point coming over the radio and just being like, yeah, just make sure that mannequin doesn't move and it's still there when you come around the next corner, because that's when you guys start to worry. And I got messages like, uncool, Jess, thanks a lot.
That's so weird. What kind of rave was this?
Like a
just full-on rave.
Yeah.
I didn't know they even had those here.
And they set up generators with a DJ station and like lights, and it's a big thing.
That's crazy. I have a funny call kind of like that where I got a call and this guy was like, there's a hand, it's a human hand. And he was like completely sure it was a human hand in like a body of water somewhere. It was when I was at DPS, and it was like right off the highway somewhere in our big state. He was like, he 100% thought it was a human hand, and he was like trying to find other body parts and stuff. And when the trooper got there, it was a Halloween decoration. But the guy was super freaked out, because I took the phone call and he was like, no, it's a real hand. Like, he was really freaked out, and it just turned out to be a Halloween prop. And I was like, oh, bummer.
I took a call once. We'll get back on track eventually. I took a call once. It was the month of October. It was around Halloween. And somebody called in that somebody's had put up a like please help sign in their neighbor's window, and they were worried that they were like asking for help and that there was somebody kidnapped. And we were like, you sure it's not a Halloween decoration? No, somebody's definitely in trouble. So of course we have to send somebody out there, and it's just a Halloween decoration. It's like, thanks for your vigilance, I guess.
Did they take their Halloween decoration down? They just leave it up?
No, the officer was just like, all right, have a nice day. Sorry to bother you.
Underneath, they write in parentheses, it's just a Halloween prop.
Just a decoration. Which is exactly what they'd want you to think.
That's true. But if I was writing a please help sign, I don't think, and if I kidnapped someone and I found that they had written a please help sign, I don't think I'd write, this is just a Halloween prop. I think I'd just throw it away.
Yeah.
Back to our story here.
No more sidetracks.
For now. So, it was not a mannequin. It was the body of Julia Woodward. Woodward had been missing since February 1st that year. She was headed to her hometown, San Rafael, California, from Nevada, and according to her family, had not been heard from since. Her mother waited a few weeks to report her missing because she was moving, and she didn't know if she had just gotten busy or what had been going on. And at first I was like, a few weeks? That seems like a long time.
It's a long time.
But if you think about it, they didn't have cell phones or anything back then. And she was an adult.
Yeah, I feel like, we're obviously, everybody's in closer contact than back then anyway, so it wasn't, like, I even think about when we were growing up, and there was, like, no cell phones and stuff like that, you know, you didn't hear from family members as constantly, and
yeah,
if somebody went out of town, they might call you to say, like, hey, we checked into the hotel, and then, hey, we got home, that sort of thing. Like, it wasn't this constant stream of communication that we're lucky to have now.
Yeah, where you can just text someone and be like, are you okay? Are you alive?
Yeah.
Also, I was like, I feel like Jess's mom would have reported her missing within the first 5 minutes, because you guys talk a lot.
Yeah.
So, according to an ABC 15 report, Julia was last seen alive at the San Francisco airport on February 1st, 1979, by her friend who witnessed her enter the airport terminal. Detectives are searching for potential witnesses who may have had contact with her in Lake Tahoe or Reno before she was discovered murdered on March 24th of 1979 in Washoe County. And that was from a report that they posted right around the time when she was reported missing. Investigators said that Woodward's eyes were sealed shut with band-aids, her legs were zip-tied, and a cloth had been used as a gag. Rocks nearby were also covered in hair and blood, and investigators at the time noted that Woodward was only wearing one shoe. Her clothes and any belongings or identification paperwork had been removed. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma. She was hit in the back of the head and murdered at the scene. According to her family, Julia was bright in school and everyone looked up to her as a positive role model. Her sister, Mary Frances, stated she would have done great things if she would have been allowed to. Julia loved to bake cookies and she was fit and smart and very sweet, according to her mother and sister, and everyone said that she was a sweet girl who loved her family.
Sad.
Unfortunately, after finding her body, it would still be 8 months before Julia was positively identified by her dental records as the victim, and her family was notified of her murder. It took 4 decades, but the suspect, Charles Gary Sullivan, was linked to the murder by semen found on the victim's pants, so she was sexually assaulted as well. Sullivan's recent arrest stemmed from an investigation launched in 2015 by Washoe County Sheriff's Detective Rick Belkey. I am just going to call him Rick from now on if I say his name, because his last name is Bjelke. After he was named to a newly formed cold case unit. He knew there was DNA and wanted to retest it with the newer technology that had not been available in the 70s. Charles Gary Sullivan was 73 years old when he was arrested at his home in Arizona. So, who is Charles Gary Sullivan? Charles Gary Sullivan was a convicted sex offender who had lived in the Reno area at the time of the murder. Washoe County deputies, along with the FBI and several Arizona agencies, raided Sullivan's home along the Mogollon Rim. There, investigators found and seized a computer with evidence including pornographic images, and according to the investigators, the images show bodies similar to how Julia's body was found.
So is this they think it was other victims, or was this like fetish pictures that matched what had happened to her?
So they it didn't really say, but I think it sounds like it was just fetish pictures, because I'm going to talk about it later on too. In a different case, they looked in his computer and found some weird pictures there too. He's just disgusting. He's just a disgusting human. His DNA was collected in 2007 when he was arrested for a different violent crime. According to ABC, he was charged in 2007 with abducting a young woman hitchhiker on Interstate 80 in the Sierra. He took her to a remote spot where he threatened her with a gun, handcuffed her, bound her ankles, and told her he would rape her. When he stepped away briefly, she freed herself, fled, and found help, and then they called authorities. The victim testified that she was hitchhiking when Sullivan offered to give her a ride, and she agreed to go with Sullivan to see a turquoise mine near Bowman Lake. He's like, hey, want to ride? Want to go see a turquoise mine? I don't know.
This was in the 70s still, though, right?
Yeah. And hitchhiking was, like, super common. Like we talked about in, was it the Toolbox Killers?
Yep.
Yeah. Which one, don't do that anymore, which we've already stated. But 2, also don't pick up hitchhikers because they might kill you. While walking down a path, she stopped to tie her shoe, and Sullivan came up from behind her, grabbed her shoulder, and pointed a handgun at her. She was then forced to lie on the ground while Sullivan handcuffed her with zip ties and bound her ankles. She testified that Sullivan told her not to look at him, and that the only thing that was going to be involved is sex, and that's a quote, which is still terrifying.
Yeah, that doesn't make it any better.
Doesn't make me like you anymore.
No.
Sullivan told the victim, and this is another quote, "We're just going to be out here for a few days having fun." So,
oh my god. I'd rather be murdered, to be honestly. I'd rather not go through days of sexual assault. I'd rather just you kill me.
Yeah, and also, like, 1, he had a plan to keep her out there for days, but 2, like, he told her that. I don't understand. I think he probably got off on her fear, like a lot of them do. And also, at that point, I would just think he was going to kill me anyways, so.
That's true.
He then went to his van to retrieve a blanket, and that's when she managed to cut through the zip ties on her ankles, and she fled. I don't know how she did that. That's amazing.
Good for her. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Fighter.
She waved down 2 men who were going by on an ATV, and the 2 men testified that the victim appeared very frantic, very scared, and then they could see, like, her zip ties on her wrists and her ankle, like, the remnants. And she also didn't have any shoes on. The victim told the 2 men that a man with a gun was trying to kill her, and at trial, Sullivan claimed that the handcuffs belonged to the woman and that she initiated the encounter. Sullivan was acquitted of kidnapping, but convicted of false imprisonment and making criminal threats. The Nevada County jury failed to agree on the kidnapping and attempted rape charges, but did convict him of false imprisonment. The judge gave him the stiffest sentence he could at the time, which was 4 years, which doesn't seem like enough to me, but whatever.
No.
And ordered him to register as a sex offender, and he served his time in California and then moved to Arizona. During his parole between 2009 and 2012, he violated the parole and failed to register as a sex offender multiple times.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The victim's description of Sullivan's efforts to tie her up and the manner in which Woodward's body was found have led investigators to believe that he may be behind other murders in which women were similarly tied up and gagged. While investigating Sullivan, his computer records were investigated at that time too, and they had found searches for, quotes, naked children, child sex, and lost hikers in California. So not only was he just a disgusting human, but he also liked disgusting things. I just don't understand. Only 4 years, you know? And also, like, I can kind of get that he wouldn't be... Like, they wouldn't charge him with the kidnapping charge because she was hitchhiking. Like, maybe legally they didn't have enough for that because she willingly got into his car. So I get the false imprisonment thing. But how did they not... The attempted sexual assault? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
He 100% said the only thing that's going to be involved is sex. So he definitely intended on raping her. I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's hard to... It's... Like, from our point of view, I'm sure it's really simple, but back then, it all depends on what was provided to the jury, you know? Like, if his side of things was it was consensual, again, we've talked about it before, all it takes is that probable cause, but she asked you to zip tie her and keep her in the woods for days?
Yeah.
No.
And take her shoes off and force her to run and search for help, and that was all part of it, right? Investigators in the case believe that Sullivan is a possible serial killer and could be linked to at least 2 other victims that were murdered in the Reno Tahoe area in the 1970s. So those 2 people are 17-year-old Jeannie Smith and 23-year-old Linda Taylor.
Wow, they're all so young.
Yeah. The body of 17-year-old Jeannie Smith, who was last seen on October 27th, 1978 in Reno, was found less than a mile away from the same remote part of northern Nevada that Julia Woodward was found. Jeannie was last seen on October 27th, like I said, between 7:30 and 9 at Circus Circus, where she worked as a waitress. Her coworker saw her leave with a man who was described as tall, between 5'7" and 5'8", 170 to 175 pounds, Caucasian with wavy, sandy, blonde hair, and he looked like a construction worker. He was wearing a plaid shirt, faded jeans, a light blue down jacket, and a Caterpillar Construction Company baseball cap.
Wow. That's very specific.
It is. I was like, wow, that's a really good witness.
Yeah.
He was also described as very friendly, and that the 2 were very friendly with each other. The investigators had a composite sketch done of the man who was called Chuck, and according to the media, it looked remarkably similar to the suspect at the time she disappeared. So comparing pictures of him then to the drawing, he looks a lot like the drawing. Her body was found by 2 hunters in November of 1979, and they found her skeletal remains just 1 mile from where Julia Woodward had been discovered, just 8 months prior to them finding this body. Animals had unearthed her body from a shallow grave. Investigators think she had been buried there for at least a year. A tennis shoe was found at the site with the initials JS on the tongue. Similar to Julia, Smith was found face down with elastic bandages over her eyes, tape on her legs, and a scarf around her neck that was used to gag her. And that's according to Reno Gazette-Journal. Medical examiners said there were indications that Smith, who was a waitress at a Reno casino, had been sexually assaulted. Jeannie's clothes, as well as other cloth, tape, and rope, were discovered within 30 feet of her skeletal remains. And as with Julie, Jeannie was missing her underwear and ID. So he took underwear and ID for trophy. In 2007, investigators received a tip that Sullivan may have dated Jeannie Smith before she disappeared, and the caller thought that he was involved in her murder. Investigators also believe Sullivan may have played a role in the March 1979 disappearance of Linda Taylor, a 23-year-old bartender at a Reno casino. Her body has never been found, but I found an article online that her family had hired a private investigator, but they had no leads of any kind of closure so far. Through Linda's roommates, who reported her missing on March 9th, 1979, they found out that Sullivan went on a date with Linda. When they first went to talk to him, Sullivan said he didn't know Taylor. He later admitted to going out with her, but said he had no knowledge of how she disappeared or where she had gone.
Then why lie in the first place? Yeah.
There's a lot, I feel like, of evidence, like circumstantial evidence that maybe could have been used against him. But then again, it was the 70s and, you know. On March 18th, 1979, Taylor's car was found abandoned in a parking lot at a grocery store in Reno, approximately 10 miles away from where the bodies of Woodward and Smith were discovered. So they were all kind of found within a 10-mile area of each other. And, I mean, Jeannie she worked at Circus Circus, and then Taylor worked as a bartender. You know what I mean? There's just things that are kind of similar. Until now, they probably couldn't have put it together anyways. But like I said, Taylor's body's never been found, so they can't like definitively connect him. But they think that he was probably involved, considering his DNA was found on 2 murder victims and he was the last person to see her, even though he claimed not to know who she was at first.
It'd be interesting to see if they've reopened it since all that came to light, since what they know about him now, about Sullivan now, with him being in connection to these other ones.
Yeah.
But if they've reopened it and, like, canvassed that area, since obviously, like, that was his spot, if they went back and tried to see if they could find, not even Taylor specifically, but any other victims.
Yeah, I think it would be because of COVID and everything. The media hasn't covered this case like it has with other ones. And I kind of want to look into it more, and maybe we can do an update if we find further. But it would be interesting to know if they had done that and if they had also looked into his past to see if any other females that he knew had mysteriously disappeared. Yeah, that he knew but didn't know, you know. Well, and the guy's name was Chuck that Jeannie was last seen with, and his name's Charles. They call Charles's...
That's a nickname.
Yeah, so there's just too many things.
I think that's what makes cold cases like that so tough, too, is like, sure, her vehicle was found in a grocery store parking lot, but had that been now, there'd be cameras showing everywhere. Every angle of that parking lot that'd be able to help out.
And I wonder if, like, her car was ever swabbed for DNA, or if they even looked for fingerprints, or, like...
Any forensics on it?
Yeah, because, you know, back then it wasn't a thing like it is now. Thank God they, like, kept the DNA evidence that they did, so it could eventually be linked to him through that other case, which I'm sure he... So this is my thought, too, right? If he had already gotten away with at least 2 murders, maybe this third one, there's probably more in between then. But between the 70s and the 2012, I think, 2007. So still 2007, 1978 to 2007. That's like 30 years, basically. You know what I mean? It's just, there have to be more victims.
Plenty of opportunity for there to be more.
Yeah, because people who do this kind of thing don't just stop. They don't just quit killing people, especially if they're getting away with it so easily, and it seems like he did.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the ways that they use to track perpetrators and stuff like that is when you have an MO that's the same and you have a suspect in mind, and then for some reason things like that stop. Because people don't just stop those, they look for suspects that have like major life changes. So did something happen in their life? Were they incarcerated for a period of time, and then did those activities start back up again? So it'd be interesting to see if they take a look at that, you know, what that kind of, how the timeline works for everything that Sullivan, like what his timeline lines up with for those girls. Yeah, because the only reason that I know what you just said, even though I watch tons of like true crime stuff, is specifically because of Paul Holes, and Paul Holes is my favorite, and his like investigation into the Golden State Killer and all of the stuff that I've watched since then. And because he stopped and the big life changes that were happening were that he was having children with his wife, and then he got older. But like you said, the only reason really that people like this will stop is for big life changes. So maybe he was incarcerated, like you said, or maybe he had a family change that took up too much and made it impossible for him to do the things that he used to do, or whatever. But I feel like that's a big gap of time, and there must have been some life changes within those years. But I also feel like there's got to be victims that they just don't know about. And I wonder... I'd be willing to believe that.
I wonder if maybe because he picked people who people actually... This is just a theory. I'm like I said before, I'm not an expert. But he picked people who actually had people who would report them missing. If maybe he was just more careful on who he picked as a victim from there out. Like maybe he just picked more vulnerable victims who didn't have a support system that would notice that they were missing, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and the move from Nevada to Arizona, the move from Nevada to Arizona is something that I think should be looked at as well.
Yeah. Something I read too was that right after the Taylor thing, he like left town. Which also is another suspicious thing. Yeah.
What county was he arrested in? Did they say what city?
I want to say that I read somewhere it was Yavapai, but I can't be 100% sure. Wait, I found it. In Yavapai County. So I'm looking at a Fox 10 report, and it says the Nevada Attorney General's Office and the Washoe County Sheriff's Office said 73-year-old Charles Gary Sullivan was arrested in Arizona's Yavapai County in the killing of 21-year-old Julia Woodward.
So I'd be interested to know if Yavapai or the surrounding counties have any cold cases of women that went unsolved that are similar and just things have never been connected.
Or he may have even gotten smarter about his DNA too. Maybe...
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because of all the changes, you can't live now and not know about everything that DNA can do now. So maybe they need to look into cases too where there was no DNA, but there are similar, eyes covered, handcuffs.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Their underwear and ID missing. Together. Just similar MOs, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be a lot of things too, that they should consider, I think. But you're right. There's so much area that he could, and who knows, maybe he was traveling and stuff too. Maybe they need to look into his traveling and everything else, because obviously he wasn't registering like a sex offender like he was supposed to. So he was probably just doing whatever the fuck he wanted.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Also, he was some of the reports I read, he was with his wife when he was arrested. And I'm who would marry him? You know?
I don't know. There's people that wrote love letters to people they knew committed crimes.
Like Chris Watts.
That's a thing.
Yeah, Chris Watts. Yeah. Who else? I'm trying to think. The Night Stalker. Probably Ted Bundy, because everyone thinks Ted Bundy's
love
hot.
Letters to Charles Manson, and it's these people are bonkers. Stay away from them. Don't try and get closer. What's wrong with you?
Also, I don't understand. Can we just talk about this for a second? We'll get back to our story. Do you ever, I look at their pictures and, one, Richard Ramirez is, he was receiving, topless pictures and stuff from girls, right? His teeth were, rotting and falling out, and he was not attractive at all. And I don't think Ted Bundy was hot. He had a unibrow. I would like to point that out. And not saying that everyone does a unibrow
Richard Ramirez is frightening.
He's scary, right? And his teeth were falling out, Jessica. You know how they found Richard Ramirez? They, found, a dental appointment card, and then they went to the dentist, and the dentist, was yeah, his teeth are fucked. Let's set higher standards, people, okay? One, if they have a shitty personality and they're murdering people, don't send them love notes. They have nothing going for them. They're not good looking and they're murderers. Let's write them off. Not saying that you have to only like good looking people, because that's not what I'm saying. But if they have a shitty personality and a shitty face, what are we doing? Writing love letters to inmates. That's all I'm saying. But also, even if they're really good looking and they're murderers, maybe don't write them either. Anyway, back to our story. From the information I found online, the COVID, delayed the trial of Sullivan, and he did submit a plea in November of 2020, not guilty, but I haven't seen anything since. I've been keeping an eye out.
So he's still in jail then?
Yeah, he's still in jail. He hasn't been convicted as far as any stories that I saw online, but according to investigators...
But they found forensic evidence on Julia Woodward, so what are they...
One of the reports I read said that his defense attorney said, just because there's DNA on her just means that they had sex. It doesn't mean that he killed her.
God, I hate that.
It's, as a defense attorney, I get why he would say that.
Yeah, but that fucking sucks.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that they were connecting the two murders because of DNA evidence, right? So what's his excuse? Okay, so maybe the first time...
That's quite the coincidence.
Yeah. Maybe
we all know how I feel about coincidences.
They don't exist. Maybe the first time you would just be a really unlucky son of a gun, right? But
we've said the word fuck. You can say bitch.
Maybe the first time you'd be a really unlucky son of a bitch, but the second time, and also when you've been convicted of doing basically the same thing to somebody, but she got away.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. You have all that, and then you have the pornographic material found on his computer. Mm-hmm. I guess it's circumstantial, but at the same time, I feel like we should also be trying to keep people like that away from other people.
Yeah, agreed. Like we've talked about before, the justice system is not great. I'm sorry, it's not, especially in cases like these. I'm of the opinion that, this is just my personal opinion, that people who commit crimes like rape and all that stuff, they really can't stop. There's something inside of them that makes them do things that, quote unquote, normal person wouldn't do. And I think that there needs to be harsher punishment for stuff like that. And I also feel sorry for that lady who the jury just kind of overlooked a little bit. Like, kudos to her for getting out of there and escaping. But can you imagine how she felt when they only gave him 4 years and then she has to live her life all those years knowing that he's out there somewhere? Like, that's scary, you know?
It's disappointing. Like, I don't know. That's another soapbox that I could climb on top of. But given recent events, I'd like to think that victims are believed a little bit more. But it's the cruel world that we live in that they're not.
Yeah, it's sad.
So he's incarcerated in Nevada?
Yes, he is incarcerated in Nevada.
Entering a plea of not guilty is very gutsy.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to believe him now. I mean, maybe back then when DNA was new, but now I feel like we all see CSI, we all see all those documentaries. I mean, there's true crime people like me. They're going to know, you know? According to investigators, the Nevada investigation remains ongoing, and in a press release, authorities stated Sullivan is believed to have lived a transitory lifestyle and asked that anyone with information contact the detective, whose last name I can't say, at 775-328-3689. The DA went so far as to say all evidence points to Sullivan being a serial killer. Lawyers for the Attorney General's office wrote in a November 7th motion. An Arizona investigator also stated that they had reason to believe Sullivan was connected to multiple unsolved crimes in Arizona, but didn't elaborate on which ones. He did, however, say the tips had come in from family and friends. So apparently after he was arrested, family and friends came forward and were like, hey, you should look into this. So I'm sure more stories will come out.
Hopefully, right? And then, you know, you said he entered his plea in 2020, and there hasn't been anything. Maybe they're compiling cases against him or something.
Yeah. Or also because he has the right to a speedy trial, maybe they're pushing it off as much as they can to build up his...
To gather what they have.
Yeah, to build up his not guilty defense, which is just straight up bullshit. Good luck with that, Chuck. And that is the story of Julia Woodward, Jeannie Smith, and Linda Taylor, and the possible serial killer, Charles Gary Sullivan, that may have taken many more lives over the past 40 plus years. I just wanted to add some information about DNA here. It seems like in the 70s, like we have said many times before, it was the prime time for killing season. As I said before, they were out like slinging their DNA everywhere. Jessica hated that.
I didn't like that before. No, I don't like it now either.
They left DNA behind, not knowing that in the 80s, DNA would become a huge part of evidence and getting justice for victims. In 1987, the United States first used DNA testing in the case of Tommy Andrews, who was a Florida rapist accused of raping a woman during a burglary. Because of the DNA testing, he was convicted. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison after his conviction. So thank God for DNA.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me in. I'm just going to tell you another short story about another Arizona case. This time it actually happened in Arizona and the suspect was arrested in Colorado. But because of DNA, it's just a short story that I kind of wanted to add at the end. It was a cold case solved with DNA. The suspect was arrested in Colorado, but the crimes took place in an Arizona apartment complex. In April of 2022, so this year, Thomas Cox, a 58-year-old male, was arrested in Colorado Springs and extradited back to Arizona to face charges on the murder of 22-year-old Susan Amy Morse. Morse was killed October 16, 1989. She was found deceased in her Mesa, Arizona apartment where she lived alone. When she failed to report to work, her parents called a welfare check-in and they sent officers out to check on her, where they found the 22-year-old who had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and asphyxiated with a power cord. Autopsy determined that her cause of death was asphyxiation. In November of 1990, Cox allegedly broke into the same apartment complex where he sexually assaulted a 23-year-old woman, stole her cash, and a VCR. When reporting the crime, the victim told officers she woke up to a man holding a knife to her stomach, telling her, "I'm not going to hurt you, just rape you." And apparently,
same thing, bro.
Yeah, apparently Cox's mother lived next door to the victim, which makes sense that he would have some kind of connection since it was literally the same apartment complex.
Yeah.
Genetic genealogy was used to link Cox to the cases, and through the use of the genetic genealogy, investigators developed a family tree that led to Cox, and his DNA was confirmed using a styrofoam cup that he had thrown out. He was also verified using fingerprints that were at the scene of the crime. Sadly, Morse's parents are deceased, but investigators notified family members who were relieved to have closure. Mesa police also told the surviving victim, who was pleased to know there was an arrest. Cox is facing a total of 16 counts, including first-degree murder, sexual assault, kidnapping, and burglary. According to Oxygen, an article I read on Oxygen, FBI Phoenix also assisted in the investigation and said in a statement to Oxygen.com that the passage of time does not deter law enforcement's persistence for truth and justice. The results of this cooperative effort will provide the victims and their families the long-awaited justice they deserve. We are always available, ready, and willing to assist our local law enforcement partners and bring to bear FBI resources to get bad actors off the streets, no matter how long it takes. And after the surviving victim found out that there was an arrest, she released a statement, and I'm going to read it. I never thought this day would come. I thought my case was stored somewhere in a dark basement. I am very thankful for Detective Samuel and the Mesa Police Department for never giving up on these cases. To the family of Susan Morse, you have my deepest sympathy. I didn't know Susan, but my fight became her fight, my pain became her pain, and my tears were her tears. Never give up on yourself, even through the darkness. My life changed that night, but I know that my 9-month-old son and I were meant to be here for a purpose and that God protected us. Thomas Cox took a lot from me that night and throughout the years, but I learned how to stop letting him continuously take. I learned how to stop the pain by not giving in and giving it away to him any longer. I learned how to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. So her child was there with her at the time as well. As the case progresses, I'm hoping there will be more updates so that I can update, maybe do a bigger story on it. Not only this case, but also the Julia Woodward case, just because I feel like there's bound to be more that's going to be connected to him. And I also feel like there's got to be more that's connected to Thomas as well, because like I said before, I don't believe that they just stop. I just think it's interesting that DNA just continues to progress and it continues to make huge changes, and hopefully will help find more people who are connected to cold cases like this one.
Hopefully it can continue to close those cases, right? Because we've mentioned before the 70s was like buck wild with serial killers, and so many of those went unsolved, and statistics say that there's dozens more serial killers, not even dozens, there's copious amounts of serial killers that we don't even know about because they had just resources just weren't available. So hopefully as technology progresses, we're able to put to rest some of those cases and get closure for victims and victims' families. That's the biggest thing for me is, of course, you want the perpetrators and the suspects to be brought to justice, but at the same time, victims and families are owed closure.
Yeah, I agree completely. This victim whose statement I just read, I just can't imagine how scary it would be. Kudos to her, right, for getting the help that she needed to get through that and to, come out stronger and make good changes for herself. That's amazing, because some people it's just too hard. Some people don't have the resources to get the help that they need. She made the decision to decide that she didn't want to be a victim anymore, and I think that's great, but she also had to live knowing that her attacker was out there somewhere. And how scary would that be?
Well, she wasn't even, this attack happened in her own home. So how, even if you move, how can you ever feel safe?
You couldn't.
Ever
and
feel
also
safe.
My question is, if it happened in the same apartment complex, why weren't they connecting dots? Were they not going door to door and investigating every which person?
Probably not.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they didn't have the time or resources, or maybe they didn't put 2 and 2 together because they were spaced out or whatever. But it just seems they kind of had the same MO, like we said. So, and it was at the same apartment complex.
Yeah, I'm wondering if she was able to describe him at all.
I didn't see anything.
Even in my mind, in a perfect world, none of this would happen. So that doesn't matter.
In SVU land. Yeah.
Yeah. But, if she's able to describe even enough to get a police sketch done and put it out around the complex.
Yeah.
If you've seen this man, call the police department. Something like that.
Maybe I'm interested in learning more as the case actually goes to trial, because maybe they'll like release more, because I feel like if she'd seen his face, that could have happened, or maybe she would have recognized him, right? Because if he's hanging out around there, she probably has seen him before. I just would like to add another, I know we're always giving tips and advice, but like always pay attention to your surroundings. Like always. And if someone like looks kind of odd, just, you know, take a minute to like mentally take a note.
As to quote one of the group's favorite book series, constant vigilance.
Yes, constant vigilance. Everywhere you go, anything you do.
Just, and I think we've touched on this before. I can't remember in what episode it was, but like trust that gut feeling. Like at the end of the day, we are instinct-based animals. Your body is trying to tell you something. There is such a thing as a survival instinct. Yep. So when the hair goes up on the back of your neck, or, you know, something seems off, like pay attention to that. Your body and your biology is trying to tell you something. Yep. So don't just push it aside.
We have these wonderful brains that were created to take notice of those sorts of things and alert you. So just like listen. Just even, you might just be like, that just feels a little weird to me. Take note of it. And stop being on your phones all the time.
Also, look both ways when you cross the road.
There's lots of things that we could
anymore.
say. We could just go on and on and on. But like, seriously, pay attention to your surroundings. And I'm not saying that she didn't. I'm just giving some tips that life tips.
Peace of mind advice. Yeah.
Okay. These are just some things that I have learned from my many, many years of Dateline and reading stories like this. Like, like I said, I don't even know if she had noticed him before, but
yeah,
I mean, just listen, like you said, to your gut.
Like our body still responds biologically to things like that. Like fight or flight is a real thing that happens to our bodies when put under stress. Yep. And that survival instinct of, I relate it back to the animal kingdom, because that's how animals live their lives. Is you're not going to survive to the next day unless you listen to those body and biological signals that your body is telling you that there's a predator around the corner, right? So like, granted, like bunny rabbits just like freeze in place, so it's not the best defense. But you know, that sort of reaction, like, that's real to them. It's real for us too. Yep. So pay attention to that. If for some reason that little voice in the back of your head says something's weird, like just pay attention to that. Take note of your surroundings. Maybe find more, like, if you're alone, remove yourself from the situation, or find a more heavily populated area. Because
yeah. But remember, just scream fire, don't scream help.
Yeah, don't scream help, don't scream anything. Scream fire though, because people will.
People are great, aren't they?
They're my favorite.
Anyway, you have more to say.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Because I feel like I'm just gonna be like, oh, and don't do this, and don't do that. Listen to Mommy Brittany.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Truth, Lies, and Alibis.